He was the architect of some of the most stringent immigration policies in a generation. She was a freshman congresswoman, a former public defender with a reputation for sharp questioning. He expected a routine political debate. He was not prepared for what happened next. In the grand theater of American politics, congressional hearings often follow a predictable script. But sometimes a moment breaks through the noise, a clash not just of personalities, but of fundamental principles, of professional backgrounds, and of sheer preparation. This is the story of one such moment, a confrontation between Stephen Miller, a former senior advisor to President Trump, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. This wasn't just another partisan debate. This was a masterclass in legal and rhetorical precision that would leave a permanent mark on the political landscape. The stage was a hearing room on Capitol Hill, buzzing with the low hum of anticipation. Journalists, staffers, and members of the public filled the gallery, all sensing that today's proceedings would be more charged than most. The subject was immigration enforcement and constitutional rights, a topic guaranteed to ignite strong passions on all sides. At the witness table sat Stephen Miller. At 39 years old, he was a familiar figure in political circles, known for his role as a key architect of the previous administration's immigration agenda. His demeanor was one of practiced composure, his expression fixed in a stern gaze that had become his trademark during countless television appearances. Dressed in a dark suit, crisp white shirt, and navy blue tie, he projected an image of unshakable confidence. He had arrived with the clear intention of defending his legacy and promoting his ongoing advocacy through his organization, America First Legal. To his supporters, he was an intellectual warrior, unafraid to advocate for what he saw as necessary, if controversial, policies. To his detractors, he was the face of a hardline approach that had sparked national debate. Across the room, among the committee members, sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. A freshman representative from Texas's 30th District, she was nonetheless no political novice. Before her election to Congress, Crockett had built a formidable career as a civil rights attorney and a public defender in Dallas. She had then served in the Texas House of Representatives, where she honed her skills in legislative debate. Her bright red blazer was a splash of color in a sea of dark suits, a visual metaphor for the distinct presence she brought to the room. In her short time in Washington, she had already earned a reputation for her incisive questioning and a refusal to be intimidated. She was known for doing her homework, for poring over documents and case law, and for bringing the methodical approach of a trial attorney to her congressional duties. The hearing was convened to examine the constitutional implications of immigration enforcement policies enacted between 2017 and 2021. For Miller, it was a platform to reiterate his long-held positions. For the committee, it was an exercise in oversight. But for Crockett, it was something more personal, an opportunity to apply her legal expertise to policies that she believed warranted rigorous scrutiny. The chairman's gavel brought the room to order. Today's hearing will examine the constitutional implications of certain immigration enforcement policies implemented between 2017 and 2021, he began. Our first witness is Mr. Stephen Miller, former senior advisor to President Trump and current president of America First Legal. Miller's opening statement was delivered with smooth assurance. He spoke in measured tones, his voice calm and firm. The policies we implemented were not only constitutional but necessary for national security, he stated. Any suggestion otherwise represents a fundamental misunderstanding of executive authority. An immigration law. He framed the administration's actions as a matter of legal duty and national necessity, portraying any criticism as rooted in political opposition rather than factual or legal grounds. The initial round of questioning proceeded as many such sessions do. Committee members took their turns, some offering friendly queries that allowed Miller to expand on his points, while others attempted more challenging lines of attack, which he deflected with practiced ease. He remained composed, occasionally allowing a slight, confident smile to appear when he felt he had successfully navigated a difficult question. The hearing seemed to be following its predicted course. Then, The chairman called the name that would change the dynamic of the entire day. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Representative Crockett, for 5 minutes. A subtle shift occurred in the room. The low murmur stilled. Cameras focused in. Crockett straightened her stack of papers and leaned slightly toward her microphone. The contrast between the two figures was immediately striking. Miller, projecting an air of established authority, and Crockett, radiating a focused, determined energy. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Miller, I'd like to discuss the constitutional principle of due process as it relates to the policy of family separations at the border." Miller's expression hardened almost imperceptibly at the specific mention of this policy. He leaned forward, ready to engage. Crockett continued, "The Fifth Amendment guarantees that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. This protection applies to all persons within the United States, not just citizens. Yet, under policies you helped craft, thousands of asylum-seeking families were separated without the benefit of individual hearings to determine their specific circumstances. How do you reconcile this practice with the constitutional requirements of due process?" It was a precise, legally grounded question, rooted in a fundamental constitutional principle. It demanded a similarly precise, legal answer. But Miller's response was not an answer. It was an interruption. Before Crockett could even complete her final sentence, he raised a finger and leaned into his microphone. "Congresswoman, I have to stop you right there," he said, his tone taking on a note of condescension. "Your premise is fundamentally flawed. The Constitution does not grant the same protections to non-citizens who are attempting to enter our country outside the legal process." The room grew quieter. Interruptions are not uncommon in heated hearings, but they carry a risk of underestimating the questioner. "Mr. Miller," Crockett interjected, her voice firm but controlled, "I haven't finished my question, and I would appreciate the courtesy of completing it before you respond." Miller's jaw tightened visibly. He was not accustomed to being corrected, especially by a first-term member of Congress. "By all means," he replied, the condescension still evident in his voice. Crockett did not skip a beat. She had established a boundary, and she now returned to her line of inquiry with renewed focus. "As I was saying, the Supreme Court has consistently held that due process applies to all persons within U.S. jurisdiction. In the case of Zvitas versus Davis, the court specifically confirmed that these due process protections apply to all persons in the United States, including those whose presence is unlawful, involuntary, or transitory. Given this established precedent, are you suggesting the Supreme Court is wrong in its interpretation?" This was the first critical turning point. Crockett had not responded with political rhetoric. She had responded with specific legal precedent, citing a relevant Supreme Court case by name. She was moving the debate onto her home turf, the detailed landscape of constitutional law. Miller shifted in his seat. The reference to case law was a clear escalation. "The Zvitas case dealt with a very different context," he countered, attempting to deflect. "What you're failing to understand is that border enforcement has unique constitutional considerations. The executive branch possesses what is known as plenary power over immigration, a doctrine recognized by the courts." "I understand border enforcement quite well, Mr. Miller," Crockett countered calmly. "And I'm also familiar with the plenary power doctrine. What I am asking about is the specific legal justification for denying individual hearings to families before separating them. Can you cite any Supreme Court precedent that explicitly authorizes the practice of family separation without due process?" The tension in the room tightened another notch. She had taken his deflection and turned it back into a more precise question. The ball was back in his court. Miller's second interruption came more swiftly. "Congresswoman, with respect, you're conflating administrative procedures with constitutional requirements. The Department of Homeland Security has broad statutory authority to detain individuals who cross the border outside the legal process. The separation policy was a consequence of enforcing laws that were passed by Congress. This was another evasion, moving the discussion from constitutional law to statutory authority. Crockett would not let the point go. "That wasn't my question, Mr. Miller," she stated evenly. "I asked for specific legal precedent that justifies family separation without due process. It's a straightforward question. Is there a case that supports this specific action?" Miller's face flushed slightly. The repetition of the question and her refusal to be led off track was clearly having an effect. "The legal precedent is the plenary power doctrine, which gives the executive branch broad authority over immigration enforcement," he reiterated before adding a pointed jab. "If you were more familiar with the intricacies of immigration law, you would know this." It was a direct challenge to her expertise. The room held its breath. How would she respond? Instead of taking the bait and becoming defensive, Crockett remained remarkably composed. She simply picked up a document from her desk. It was a deliberate, powerful gesture. "I'm quite familiar with the plenary power doctrine, Mr. Miller," she said, her eyes fixed on him. "I'm also familiar with the 2018 case of Ms. L. v. ICE, where a federal judge issued a nationwide injunction ordering the government to reunite separated families. In that ruling, the judge stated that the practice, in their view, shocks the conscience and presented serious due process concerns. Were you aware of this ruling when you continued to publicly defend the policy?" This was a devastating move. She had countered his challenge not with argument, but with evidence. A specific court ruling that directly contradicted his assertion of unchecked authority. Miller's third interruption was swift and defensive. That ruling was a district court decision, narrowly focused on specific implementation issues, not the underlying policy itself. And if we're going to discuss court cases, we should also mention that multiple courts have upheld the authority of the executive branch in this area. "Mr. Miller," Crockett cut in, her patience now visibly wearing thin, "I have limited time, and you have interrupted me 3 times now to avoid answering my specific questions." She let that fact hang in the air for a moment, allowing the committee and the audience to absorb it. He was the one being evasive. He was the one refusing to engage with the substance. "Let me be more direct," she continued, her voice sharpening. "Did you or anyone in the administration receive legal advice indicating that family separation without individual hearings could violate constitutional due process protections?" The gallery stirred. This was no longer a theoretical debate about legal doctrine. This was a question about internal deliberations and what the administration knew and when. Miller's expression darkened. He knew he was on dangerous ground. "Congresswoman," he said, adopting a more formal tone, "internal legal deliberations are typically covered by executive privilege, as I'm sure you are aware. But I can state that every action we took was properly vetted and approved by the legal counsel at the relevant departments." It was another non-answer, hiding behind the shield of privilege. Crockett nodded slowly, as if she had expected this. Then she reached for another document. This was the moment the hearing would turn. "I have here a memorandum," she said, holding the paper up for emphasis, dated April 23, 2018. "It is from senior attorneys within the Department of Justice to the Attorney General at that time. This memo expresses direct concerns about the constitutionality of family separations without individual hearings, warning of potential violations of due process. Were you copied on this memo?" Miller's eyes widened just enough to register genuine surprise. This was not a public court ruling. This was an internal document. His fourth interruption came with a new, sharper edge. "That document, if it is what you say it is, would be a confidential internal communication," he stated, his voice rising slightly. "I would question how it was obtained by this committee. Furthermore, individual memos from staff attorneys do not represent the final legal position of the Department of Justice, and I am not going to comment on leaked internal documents." He was attempting to question the legitimacy of the document itself, to shift the focus from its content to its provenance. But the committee chairman intervened. "The Congresswoman obtained this document through proper committee channels, Mr. Miller. Please answer the question." The ground beneath Miller was shifting. The chairman had just validated the document's legitimacy. Crockett pressed her advantage, her tone relentless. "The question remains, were you aware that attorneys within the Department of Justice had raised formal, written concerns about the constitutionality of this policy?" Yes or no? Trapped, Miller fell back on evasion. There were many legal discussions about all aspects of immigration policy, he replied. Different attorneys had different views. That is the nature of the legal process within any administration. Crockett would not accept this. So, you're aware that DOJ attorneys raise constitutional concerns about family separation without due process? Is that a yes? Frustrated and cornered, Miller's fifth interruption was his most aggressive yet. What you are doing here is creating a political spectacle rather than engaging in a serious policy discussion, he asserted, his voice rising in volume. These kinds of gotcha questions, based on leaked documents, are precisely why the American people don't trust Congress to address immigration seriously. If you want to grandstand, that is your prerogative. He had now fully shifted to attacking her motives, a classic tactic when the substance of the debate is being lost. But in doing so, he had made his cardinal error. He had underestimated Jasmine Crockett one time too many. He had mistaken her legal precision for political theater. He had interrupted her for the sixth time, and in the process, he had handed her the opening she needed to deliver a response that would reverberate far beyond the walls of that hearing room. The atmosphere was electric. Everyone could feel that a breaking point had been reached. Congresswoman Crockett set her papers down deliberately. She took a calm, measured breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was no longer just the voice of questioner. It was the voice of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. What happened next would be replayed millions of times. This was no longer a simple exchange of questions and answers. This was the moment Stephen Miller's confident facade would shatter, and the moment Jasmine Crockett would show the nation exactly what happens when you interrupt a former public defender who came prepared. The hearing room was holding its breath. Stephen Miller had just interrupted Congresswoman Crockett for the sixth time, accusing her of creating a political spectacle. The tension was at its breaking point. What happened next was not a retort, but a reckoning, a methodical and powerful dismantling of a witness's credibility, rooted in legal expertise and unwavering principle. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett did not raise her voice. Instead, she lowered it, commanding the room with a calm, authoritative tone that felt more powerful than any shout. "Mr. Miller," she began, her eyes locked on his. "I have allowed you to interrupt me 6 times now. I have watched you avoid straightforward questions about constitutional law, a field I dedicated my career to before serving in this Congress." She set her papers down, her hands now free. The gesture was symbolic. She was moving away from her notes and speaking from a place of deep conviction and expertise. "So, let me be perfectly clear about what is happening here," she continued. "You came to this hearing expecting deference. You believed your previous position and your media presence would intimidate a freshman member of Congress. But what you failed to realize is that long before I arrived in Washington, I spent years in courtrooms defending the constitutional rights of individuals. I stood up for people who had no power, no privilege, and no platform. People who could not hide behind political talking points or executive privilege." The gallery was utterly silent. Miller's expression, once one of smug condescension, was now frozen, a mask of surprise and growing apprehension. "So, when you sit there and lecture me on immigration law while refusing to answer basic questions about due process, a principle I defended every single day as an attorney, you are not demonstrating your expertise. You are demonstrating a profound contempt for the constitutional oversight this committee is charged with conducting." Crockett then picked up the Department of Justice memo once more, holding it aloft not as a prop, but as evidence. "This document," she stated, her voice ringing with clarity, "shows that your own administration's lawyers formally warned that family separations without individual hearings likely violated constitutional due process. Yet, those legal concerns appear to have been set aside." She then delivered the devastating facts. Because of this, over 5,500 children were separated from their parents. The government's own watchdog would later find that the records of these separations were so poorly maintained that some families risked being torn apart permanently. "Mr. Miller, that is not a demonstration of strong border security. That is a demonstration of profound administrative failure and a disregard for fundamental rights. Miller attempted to interject, to reclaim control of the narrative, but Crockett held up a single, firm hand. "No, Mr. Miller, you have had your 6 interruptions. Now, it is my turn to finish." She leaned forward, her gaze intensifying. "The policies you championed were not merely controversial. According to this internal memo and subsequent federal court rulings, they were likely unconstitutional. And what concerns me most is that you are not here today to reflect, to acknowledge missteps, or to help this nation craft a better, more effective immigration system. You are here to defend the indefensible and to promote yourself as an unimpeachable policy expert." Then came the moment, the line that would be clipped, shared, and replayed millions of times across every platform. It was delivered not with a shout, but with a piercing, calm intensity that carried the full weight of her professional experience. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dropping to a powerful, almost conversational tone that forced everyone to lean in to listen. "I may be new to Congress, but I am not new to the Constitution. And while you were in the White House, drafting press releases and giving media interviews, I was in federal courtrooms, defending the very constitutional principles that you are now casually dismissing." She paused, letting the contrast sink in. "So, do not mistake my freshman status in this chamber for a lack of understanding. The difference between us today is not our knowledge of the law, Mr. Miller. It is our respect for it." The effect was instantaneous and electric. The public gallery erupted into a mix of gasps, scattered applause, and murmurs. Committee members on both sides of the aisle reacted visibly, some with barely concealed smiles of approval, others by shifting uncomfortably in their leather chairs. The chairman, struggling to maintain order, brought his gavel down repeatedly. "Order. The committee will come to order." All cameras swiveled to Stephen Miller. The color had drained from his face. His previously confident posture had deflated. For the first time in his very public career, he appeared genuinely and completely rattled. The unflappable political operative was, for a long moment, utterly speechless. When he finally found his voice, it had lost all its earlier force and polish. It was thinner, defensive. "Congresswoman, I respect your legal background," he started, the words sounding hollow and rote. "But I stand by the constitutionality of the policies I advocated for. The executive branch has both the authority and the duty to secure our nation's borders." But the damage was done. His response was a generic talking point, a deflated balloon after Crockett's surgical strike. It failed to address any of the specific legal challenges she had presented. The power in the room had irrevocably shifted. "My time has expired, Mr. Chairman," Crockett said, nodding respectfully. "But I would ask that the DOJ memo expressing constitutional concerns about family separation be entered into the official record." Without objection, the chairman declared, the official proceeding finally moving past the seismic event that had just occurred. The remainder of the hearing was anticlimactic. Miller attempted to regain his footing during questioning from other members, but his answers were cautious, defensive, and lacked their earlier swagger. The confrontation had exposed a vulnerability, and everyone in the room knew it. The hearing adjourned hours later, but the real event had concluded in those 5 explosive minutes. The aftermath was immediate and viral. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were flooding the internet. The most powerful moment, Crockett's final statement, raked up over 1 million views in the first hour. A legal analyst speaks. What we witnessed was not political theater. It was a masterclass in congressional oversight, substantive, specific, and devastatingly effective. A host argues, it was a well-executed political ambush, but it doesn't change the fact that our border remains in crisis. A rapid-fire sequence of posts and memes. Text overlays. Crockett schools Miller on the Constitution. Don't interrupt a public defender. A popular meme shows Miller's stunned face with the caption, "When you realize you should have done the reading." For Congresswoman Crockett, the moment was transformative. Her social media following exploded. Democratic leadership took new notice of the freshman representative's potent skills. More importantly, She had demonstrated the immense value of bringing real-world expertise into the halls of power. For Stephen Miller, it was a rare and very public setback. The encounter challenged his carefully cultivated image as an unassailable intellectual architect, forcing even his allies to acknowledge he had been outmaneuvered on legal grounds. But the implications reached far beyond two political figures. The exchange forced a national conversation to momentarily cut through the partisan noise. But the implications reached far beyond two political figures. The exchange forced a national conversation to momentarily cut through the partisan noise. It highlighted the critical, nonpartisan importance of due process. It showcased what genuine oversight looks like, not grandstanding, but the rigorous application of facts, law, and evidence. It was a powerful reminder that in a democracy, no policy is above questioning, and no official is beyond accountability. This moment reminds us that our institutions are only as strong as the people who serve within them. It underscores the power of preparation, the importance of principle, and the enduring strength of the Constitution. When expertise meets conviction, and when courage confronts overconfidence, it doesn't just make for a viral clip. It reinforces the very foundations of our democracy. This is why oversight matters. This is why expertise matters. This is why your voice matters. What political moments do you believe define our current era? Which exchanges should we break down next? Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe in clear, factual analysis of the events that shape our world, then you know what to do. A large animated subscribe button appears on the screen, along with the channel logo. Narrator, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. We are just getting started, and you won't want to miss what we cover next. Stay informed. Stay engaged. We'll see you in the next video.